Going to be great. Before we get started, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Eileen Chang, and this is Victoria Fiore. We're two first years at Haas, and we're on the leadership team for the Global Social Venture Competition, which I just want to take a couple minutes to tell you guys a little bit about. The Global Social Venture Competition, or GSVC, is a worldwide business plan competition that takes place every year that's hosted here at Berkeley for the Global Finals. It involves 500 entrants from all over the world, and we give out $45,000 in prize money. The thing that distinguishes it from other business plan competitions is that it's for specifically business ventures that have a direct social impact. They can be nonprofit or for-profit, but they must have some sort of social impact. So just a couple points. If you have a business idea that could potentially have a social impact, we want to encourage you to enter the competition. The deadline to submit an application is January 17th. And I'd like to encourage you guys to use tonight as a potential networking opportunity to build a team if you're interested in entering. And secondly, if you are simply just interested in learning a little bit more about social entrepreneurship, I'd encourage you to attend the global finals that are happening on April 8th next year, as well as the conference on social entrepreneurship that's happening the next day, which we're also going to be putting on. So can I just get everybody who's on the GSVC leadership team to stand up briefly? Great. So just if you have any questions about GSVC, how to get involved, how to enter, please come up to one of us at the end of this, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Great, thanks. So like Eileen said, my name is Victoria, and I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator tonight, Roxanne Miller. Roxanne is actually working with the Lester Center for Entrepreneurship here at Haas this fall, primarily to help the GSVC team get ready for the competition this year and kind of enhance our capabilities. So she's been a wonderful team member and has graciously agreed to host this panel. Roxanne is a Haas alum as well. When she was here, she was a co-chair of GSVC, like we all are now. So she brings lots of wisdom on that front. But she's specifically qualified to speak tonight as our moderator because she has extensive experience in social enterprise. Right after graduating Haas in 2009, she was selected for a fellowship with the Grassroots Business Fund, for which she worked in Tanzania to launch a program delivering consulting services to small businesses there in Tanzania and in Bolivia. Prior to that, she worked in several eminent institutions in the social enterprise space, including the Draper Richards Foundation, Unitas, where we had the pleasure of working together, and the Kiva Fund. So we're very pleased to have Roxanne here moderating for us tonight, and I'm going to pass the mic to her to introduce our two distinguished panelists.
Well, thank you all, and welcome to what has been one of the chillier days here in Berkeley. I also just want to make a little note that if you are a student and you're interested in GSVC, you can also be a student judge. So student judging happens at the end of January, and get in touch with any of the leadership team and you can help judge as well. So Eileen and Victoria asked me just to spend 3 minutes introducing a little bit of tonight's panel and the idea of base of the pyramid. So some of you in this audience may have experience working in ventures and potentially serving customers that are at the base of the pyramid. And for others, this may be a new concept. So just briefly, globally there are 3.7 billion people who are largely excluded from formal markets. And that incorporates people who are earning less than $8 a day when you look at purchase power parity. And these folks kind of comprise the base of the pyramid, or the BOP, as it is called kind of in the industry as well. But annually, if you look at their combined income, it's over $3 trillion in market purchasing power, and it's growing at 8% growth annually. So in general, the idea of the base of the pyramid really became popular about 10 years ago, and the concept was, let's look at this kind of market as an opportunity, instead of just looking at it as people who live in poverty, are they also potentially consumers, producers, and entrepreneurs themselves? So historically, though, there have been challenges in working and operating in this environment. So this is a picture that I think Victoria took during some of her work in India. And what you can see here is an entrepreneur who is selling goods and services, who also looks like she may be a mother with several children that she's either taking care of or mothering herself. And when you look at kind of this person as being potentially your partner, or your consumer, or your micro-entrepreneur, they have different challenges that they face than what we experience here. And often, people at the BOP remain under the radar for most conventional business models, and as a result rely on substandard products and informal markets that often tend to be much more expensive. So the idea is, how can companies and ventures like the ones that we'll hear about today work beyond some of these constraints around product design, sourcing and distribution, partnerships, and pricing. And we wanted to just provide you with 3 examples before we move into our panelists today. So on the top left, you see an example of Unilever and how they first entered this market several years ago, thinking about the concept of a sachet. So instead of creating a brand new product, they created a brand new size of product. So a simple individual use a shampoo that was marketed was seen to be more affordable, because instead of buying a large bottle, you could afford to buy a single-use quantity. Now, what has happened in the market is that instead of just thinking about how to take the exact same product that we offer here and just scale it down, we thought of, there's been more and more work about how to actually build business models and products specifically for this market. And that's the very interesting work, and that's why we're really excited to hear from the panelists today. So what you see in the middle is D-Light Design, and 2 children holding their solar panel light. I think it's the S10, or formerly the Kirin. And it's an extremely user-friendly design that includes no detachable parts. It has a lot of portability and multiple settings, and also it can be carried, it can be hung from the ceiling, it can be used in multiple ways. So not only was the product design kind of taking into account the needs of the consumer, but it was also built in a very affordable manner. And in most cases, or in some cases, 5 to 30% of monthly income right now is spent on kerosene. And so you can see that within 6 months, using this solar lantern, the savings will pay for itself. And then the bottom right, which is kind of a little bit down there, is Vision Spring, which is a nonprofit that plays in this space. And they have $4 eyeglasses that they sell. And so they have innovations on 2 models. One is that they have very affordable glasses, which glasses actually lead to a 35% increase in wage earning. Once you have proper glasses so you can see properly, you can earn a lot more money. But also, they have entrepreneurs who actually have kind of they're called micro franchises, where they go around and they sell these glasses to people in their community. So they're not only helping people in their community with these affordable glasses, but they're employing entrepreneurs to sell these products. So that's just a brief introduction to the market. I just want to pause and ask if there are any questions before we get started. Okay, yes.
Could you just speak to where these business ideas originated from? Are these ideas that came out of the Haas Business School? Or?
Okay, great. So the question was, where did these business ideas come from? So Unilever is obviously a multinational corporation. D-Light Design was actually a GSVC award winner in 2007, second place, but that most of the founders are from Stanford University, so right down the road. And Vision Spring was started by Dr. Jordan Caslow, who is based in New York but had based this business model on a lot of his experience in Latin America. And so I think their first they do work now all around the world, in India and Latin America. Okay, great. So with that, I'd like to introduce David Green, who's going to be our first speaker, who I've had the pleasure of seeing speak before, and I'm thrilled that he'll be here to kind of tell his very compelling story. David has worked with many organizations to make medical technology and healthcare services sustainable, affordable, and accessible to all. Most famously, he has helped to establish Aerolab, which is based in India, to provide affordable intraocular lenses, and that company now has 8% of global market share. He has helped develop high-volume quality eye care programs that are affordable to the poor and self-sustaining from user fees, including Aravind Eye Hospital in India. And he'll talk about some of the work that he did with UC Berkeley graduates with that. And within this paradigm of humanizing capital, he now works at Ashoka as a VP to create social investing instruments to support sustainable social enterprises, primarily in eye care and solar energy. And he has also helped create Conversion Sound, a social enterprise to make affordable hearing devices with a novel fitting, and Quantum Catch to make optical products affordable. He's a graduate of the University of Michigan with a bachelor's in general studies and a master's degree in public health. He has won many awards, including a MacArthur Fellow, an Ashoka Fellow, and is recognized by the Schwab Foundation as a leading social entrepreneur. And with that, I'd like to invite David to come up.
Thank you. Okay. Does this thing automatically gets going? Hi, everyone. So I'll talk fast and I'll cover a lot of points, but then you can ask questions because I'll try and keep it to just 10 minutes. So a lot of my work has historically been in eye care, and cataract's the main cause of blindness, followed by refractive error. So a lot of my work has been about helping bring about a transformation of, instead of giving the cataract blind thick cataract glasses following surgery, which we found more than 50% would lose or break, rendering them blind again, I sort of led the way to help introduce intraocular lenses, which is a lens that is surgically implanted in the eye, which is a permanent solution and gives much better visual acuity. Whoops. Okay. So I started working with Aravind Eye Hospital back in 1983 when they were doing something like 3,000 surgeries a year. And they have, well, this is an old slide, they now have 8 eye hospitals in the southern state of Tamil Nadu. And this year they'll do close to 350,000 surgeries. And they have a model where 1/3 pay nothing, 1/3 pay 2/3 cost, 1/3 pay well above cost. And with that, they're able to make a substantial profit margin. And so I've helped spread that model to many different locations, many different countries, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, about the financing I helped develop for these programs. This is another example of a big eye hospital in Egypt. In this instance, I helped take a very successful for-profit network of 32 eye hospitals and create a low-pay free hospital based here in Cairo. It's the small building behind the larger one. And in this situation, the high pay got going long before the low pay, and its growth was flat. It wasn't profitable. And then we got the low pay hospital going, where we did 2,000 free surgeries in the marketplace, just to let the population know that we were there and that we cared. And once we got going with that, the surgical volume in the high pay shot way up, and it became profitable. And so now this low pay hospital last year, they did about 10,000 surgeries, 31% were free, and even the paying patients paid only 25% of the market rate. And even with that low price, they were able to be profitable on their own without any cross subsidies. I've helped create maybe 15 eye care programs, and then help set up training institutions, which have helped maybe 300 programs become self-financing from user fees. And so one of the things powering that growth and expansion are affordable consumables. In 1992, I helped develop Aurolab, which is related to Aravind. It's a nonprofit manufacturing entity, and they make affordable supplies for eye care, namely intraocular lenses, sutures, pharmaceuticals. And what happened was, back in the late, I was getting lots of lenses donated throughout the 80s, and then the donations dried up. And that's when I looked to make intraocular lenses. So I think it took me 8 years to get 200,000 lenses donated for Aravind and the Nepal Blindness Program. And now Aurolab sells, this year they'll sell 2 million lenses. And even more importantly, well, when we started, our price was $10 when the prevailing market price was $300. And then that was in 1992. And all these other companies in India mainly saw what we were doing. And they got into the act of producing not just intraocular lenses, but other ophthalmic supplies. And they actually drove our prices down so that our lowest priced lens today is $2. But in the meantime, India's surgical volume went from 800,000 cataract surgeries a year in 1992 to close to 5 million 10 years later, and it's still growing. And so this is an example, I call it using, it's sort of using competitive forces to change the competitive landscape. Very often people ask me, you know, when I start a new venture, like I'll talk about this hearing device we're developing, they'll say, well, what about competition? Well, we welcome competition because competition is what grows the market, especially when you're trying to convert need into demand. And a lot of this work really pertains to addressing not the income disparity, but really the pricing disparity. How do you make things affordable to low-income people, especially high-margin medical products, pharmaceuticals? You could say that, I mean, it's like cocaine and marijuana, the kind of profits they make on pharmaceuticals and medical devices. A lot of my work is demystifying cost structure, but more importantly, deconstructing the supply chain to see where the cost and margins are in the whole supply, in a whole ecosystem, and then to figure out where I call it the non-value added part of the distribution chain is. Because a lot of Aurolab's success is non-conventional distribution, looking at how we create distribution to just take out those parts of the chain that are just in there because they're controlling the supply in a given area and jacking up prices. So looking at a problem from an ecosystems approach at all aspects of the food chain and seeing where you can have leverage and then leverage that into affordability. So my whole thing is gaining control of technology, to be in control of production, to be in control of pricing and distribution to ensure affordability. So it's a control thing. And I've done that with many different products, but now I'm starting to work with big corporations. I'm working with one large medical device company in India, helping them figure out how to make their cardiology products affordable to lower income people. And it's very different and very challenging because, with Aravind and Aurolab, they're patient-centric. They always put themselves in the position of the patient and figure out, okay, if I'm the patient, what obstacles do I need to overcome to get my sight back? And most companies that have an ethical, legal, fiduciary responsibility to do return on investment to their shareholders, and where their whole system is based on how to maximize return, whether it's at the individual, departmental, divisional, company, shareholder level, everything becomes company-centric. So it's very difficult to get these large companies to see, okay, and I gave them the proposition, if you reach the lower economic strata in an appreciable way, that will increase the volume of patients coming to the higher economic strata. and it's actually starting to work in a couple of pilots in India, specifically with cardiology products. So, but it's still very challenging. I mean, it's challenging either way. If you're gaining control of technology and production, there's all sorts of risks that you face. Probably the biggest risk is how you sell. It's not that difficult to overcome technology risks, manufacturing risks, but it's really the selling risk and the competitive environment that causes so much difficulty. So this is Aurolab today, and we do everything that any major company does in terms of our technology and fulfillment of regulatory requirements. The only thing that we do is price the product much lower. We were the largest ophthalmic company in the world just tried to buy Aurolab. We were successful in fending them off, but that just shows that they're probably the biggest competitor to the largest ophthalmic company in the world. And so they were just trying to kind of buy up the low end of the market and be able to claim that for themselves. Another thing that I do in these technology projects is I don't recreate technology. I go out and I find someone with extreme technical competence. Like I found Rolf Spengler, who was the head of R&D for US Surgical in Germany, and I worked with him to make suture needles and to make a whole suture factory really. And I found him. A lot of it is serendipity and luck. I found him through the Grateful Dead band, through a Grateful Dead connection, oddly enough. So we work together, and the other aspect of this technology is when you find an individual to work with who really knows their stuff, you work with the individual and not with the whole company. So like I think I paid Rolf more than what he was getting at US Surgical, but he was but the whole business model and all the costs, including the startup costs, including his fee, were all sculpted to result in affordability. Okay, so I'll keep going here. All right, so here's just a quick example of, it costs Aurolab $1 to make a lens. It costs Alcon $1. This is from a couple years ago when Aurolab was making 1 million lenses and selling them. Alcon sold 7 million, but out of that 7 million, they were a 920 million company. Aurolab was just a 1 million. Or, excuse me, a 5 million company. So if you were to multiply that 1 million times 7, they would be a $35 million company versus a 920 million, which kind of gives you a sense of how we sculpt cost, margins, and the whole distribution to result in affordability to the end user. So we might have 38% profit margin, but it's fewer margin dollars in these big companies. So that's sort of how it's structured. Okay. Here's where I'll pass over the name in that slide. Aurolab beat out a very large medical device company on $1 million contract for suture. And that company sued us and the government of India, claiming that we didn't fulfill the bidding requirements. Anyway, to make a long story short, they sued us, they lost, they appealed, they won, and we took it to the Indian Supreme Court, where we ultimately won. But in the meantime, that company had reduced the price of their product from $240 a box down to $23 to compete with us, and I'm sure they were still making a profit. And so again, this is how you change pricing, use pricing as a weapon to change the competitive landscape. That's with some products, they're so new that it's a new thing in the market, but everything that I'm talking about thus far is really taking something which is already there and figuring out how to produce it and without infringing intellectual property or violating trade secret law. Here's a very instructive slide, and this is kind of what I show the large medical company that I'm working with now as a consultant. It's the pink line to pay attention to. Aravind Eye Hospital is Alcon's biggest customer in the world. Alcon makes more money off of Aravind, even though Aravind only buys 8% of their lenses from Alcon. and they spend 65% of their intraocular lens budget on those 8% lenses. That's because people come, they want, I want the hydrophobic acrylic lens, the Acrosoft made by Alcon, and that helps Aravind charge more margin and make more money. But so then they sell the other 92% for 35% of their budget to Orolab. Aravind is also Orolab's biggest customer. And so here you have an instance of one hospital being the biggest customer to both the premium price product and the low price product. And so that's what I tell medical companies, especially big ones. I say, why not, right now you're a premium price, why not go in and capture the low end also, where you can be selling at differentiated prices to the same institution. So a lot of my work is helping them look at how they do that differentiation, both in their product line and with their partner hospitals, how those hospitals create tiered pricing, in this case for cardiology products. I'll move kind of fast now. Here's another technology company that I'm helping to develop. It's making a Bluetooth-enabled hearing device, and you can download an app to your smartphone and wirelessly test your own hearing and program the device in like 5 minutes. And so that's a strategy that we're using here in the developed world. In the developing world, we'll have it be like an add-on business. So like somebody, a technician in Grameen phone shop can be trained in our system and be fitting hearing devices this way. And so the whole idea here is to go around the highly dysfunctional channel. Only 7 million hearing aids are sold each year, and yet there's a need for 600 million, and most of it's due to high prices charged by the manufacturers to audiologists and ENT doctors, who then charge high prices to the customer. So again, this is an example of finding extreme technical competence to develop this whole novel system. And in this case, I work with Stavros Baseas, who's the former chief technologist of GN Resound. Now I'll just finish up by talking about social investing. And I'll be talking about the iFund, which I just launched with Deutsche Bank, a solar fund, which is in the development, and then a healthcare fund that I'm developing. So I won't go into all those details, but the iFund, I brought together Deutsche Bank and the International Agency for Prevention of Blindness, which is a leading consortium of eye care groups, and they helped find the investments for Deutsche Bank. And then we went out and raised money primarily from governments, development banks, high net worth individuals. And what we did is we convinced Deutsche Bank to put in $1 million at 1% return, where that $1 million takes the first hit if there's any losses. And then we got another $500,000 like that. And on top of that, we put in another $500,000 that took the second loss position at 2% return. And that reduced the risk of the whole fund, so that the French government came in with, I don't know, 5 or 6 million at like 3% return. And then the Overseas Private Investment Corporation of the US government came in. And by then it was starting to look like, a pretty good investment for them, because all the others below them were assuming risk and taking the hit. And so it's like, it's a collateralized debt obligation turned upside down. Good. You're an MBA student. You know this. Yeah. So it's the high risk position is getting the least return. It's like turned upside down. And so the final investor that came in was Storebrand, the largest Norwegian insurance company. So they're getting 5% return, which looks kind of average of what they usually get as a return in their large fund investing, but they have very little risk. And so what I'm doing now is looking at how to take that concept and employ it for the development of other funds. So I have a big consortium of solar energy companies and organizations, and we're just bringing in €500,000 to develop a solar energy fund whereby the criteria by which investment is made is oriented towards companies that serve low-income populations with solar energy. So it's how to surface those solutions in the whole supply chain, technology, manufacturing, distribution, and user financing. And then I have another fund, it's a health fund for frugal innovation. And so that will be mainly India-centric, where Oxford University and the George Institute are sponsoring that. And we also have some seed money to get that going. And then I have another fund that I'm hoping to develop with Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. They're putting aside $100 million in mission-related investing, and we're going to look at how we can leverage that into a larger fund and mainly orient those investments to entities that are Medicaid-oriented, since that's how most people will hopefully, most of the uninsured in this country will hopefully be insured as the Medicaid requirements expand. So there's a lot to say about social investing. You can ask questions of me, and I can explain more, but the main point I want to make is that I like to see how social investing instruments can be crafted to help create the asset class of social enterprise, which presently doesn't exist. If you look at a lot of social enterprise, a lot of it is in the nonprofit realm, and those groups cannot leverage off of an increasing valuation, like, for instance, Google. I mean, Google's an extreme example. They only had $25 million in investment before they did their IPO, and that's a case of extreme leveraging. But anyway, how do you create a social enterprise where it has control and governance to ensure the social impact as shares change hands, and where there's some exit strategy and liquidity, but where you're able to maintain fidelity to the social impact side? So I'll stop there. These are some of the points that I made throughout this talk, and I think I already said all of them, so I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, David. So thank you, David. We'll have, I'm sure, many questions for you during our Q&A. Now I'd like to transition to Jonathan Cedar, who is the CEO and co-founder of BioLite. Let me just grab this. So BioLite, this is the stove, and he'll talk about it more, but really is a company that develops clean burning biomass energy solutions for the base of the pyramid homes. Jonathan's committed to bringing together technology, user-centric design, and innovative business structures to serve the needs of underserved communities around the world. And he comes from a long design background as a senior design engineer at Smart Design in New York, where he developed products for OXO, Pepsi, World Kitchen, Staples, and Lego, which is like my dream company. So Jonathan received a BA in Engineering and Environmental Science from Dartmouth College, and he also enjoys playing the banjo, but he didn't bring that tonight, so we'll look forward to hearing about BioLite.
Okay, thanks. So I think I'm the representation for a very early stage enterprise this evening. BioLite's been a concept for about 4 years and a business for about 1. And as Roxana mentioned, we came out of a design background and have really spent a majority of this year trying to make a business case for what was originally a health intervention. So we came at cook stoves from the angle of almost 2 million people die every year from indoor smoke, and how do you create a solution that doesn't require philanthropy in order to get widespread dissemination. And so what I pulled together this evening are a handful of slides out of actually the pitch decks that we've been using that talk about how do you deliver clean cook stoves in a model that actually has consumer value. And so for us, in order to understand home energy, we thought we'd start in our own kitchen. And so, all of these services exist in American life at pretty much every level of our society, whether you're a low-income person or fairly wealthy. And in developing communities, most people are trying to achieve many of these same services, right? I mean, people are buying mobile phones for communication. They're finding different ways to use lighting, obviously cooking. And the problem is there's not the energy to supply that. So this is a home I was in Karnataka last month, and in India, in all of India, 80% of residential energy comes from biomass, and biomass is wood, charcoal, dung, agricultural residues. And the problem is all of this energy really only serves one function. It's just for cooking, and it's actually tremendously inefficient even with cooking. So about between 5 and 10% of all of this energy even makes it into that pot. And this is the reality of home energy for about half of the planet. And so, 3 billion people cook on wood. In India specifically, which is where we're targeting the initial entry of BioLite products, about 3/4 of the population cooks on biomass, and that correlates very highly with the unelectrified portions of the country. So about half of people who cook on biomass have no electricity, the other half have largely unreliable electricity. But the thing that was striking to us was you can see the need, the energy demand is there, and people are spending money for this. So the number should be 17 million, but there were 17 million new mobile phone subscribers in India last month. And the largest growing segment of that is rural, where people don't really have the ability to charge these devices. And so using that as an indication of electricity demand within the country, we said, okay, how do we serve that segment? And we've seen that mobile didn't develop in India the same way it developed here, right? People aren't putting up lines and building infrastructure in the same way. And so the question is, how is the electrical infrastructure going to develop there? And what we're proposing is that it's going to be around a distributed, decentralized model. So bringing it back to where we started, right? Home energy, biomass cooking. So in some respects, this is actually a really good tool, right? I mean, it cooks your food, and it uses the fuels that you have available to you. People understand how to do it. It's been done for ages. But the total costs of this system are very high, and some of those are direct economic costs to the end user, and some of those are costs that other stakeholders care about, that governments care about, for example. So what are those costs? I mean, to us, we came into this originally for the health costs. So smoke from open biomass fires kill about 2 million people, twice as many as malaria. To the families, probably the most urgent need is around either time spent collecting fuel or, in many regions, actual economic expenditure. All that wood's coming from somewhere. So it's a big cause of deforestation. And if we were being honest, probably the reason cook stoves are getting as much attention as they are right now is because we're starting to understand the very direct link between biomass cooking and climate change. First for CO2, but then also for black carbon, which is essentially dark particulate matter in smoke, which has been shown to be responsible for 1/3 as much climate change as CO2. So people are thinking now that based around climate financing, you can actually maybe make a profit on cook stoves. So what were the solutions that, what are the solutions outside of the open fire that people have pursued before us? We sort of split it into two categories. There were passive solutions, which were very good at saving fuel, so they can save between 25 and 50% of fuel. They use locally available fuels. The operation is usually familiar to that of an open hearth, so people understand how to use them, but they don't address emissions for health or for black carbon. And fundamentally, they don't do that much different than your open hearth fire. And so it's been very hard to get consumer buy-in around these products. There's a new generation of products that use fans to affect changes in emissions characteristics, and so you can provide a relatively safe indoor product that reduces smoke on the order of 90%. But big barriers here. They require electricity. We already said that half of homes have no electricity, the other half have unreliable electricity. They require behavioral changes, either purchasing pellets or pre-processing your fuels. And so for all these reasons, we haven't seen a ton of adoption in fan stoves. And so, we came at this problem and said, okay, how do we combine the fuel and emissions benefits, make it work in this environment, but then also add a layer that actually makes this economically valuable. As I mentioned, we came out of Smart Design. Smart does user-centered consumer products, probably best known for OXO. And so on the right is my co-founding partner, Alec. Alec came in with this, which was a small battery-powered camping product, and we were just astonished by how much change you could affect in wood combustion with adding a simple fan. But again, the problem, off-grid environments, you can't run a fan. And so how do you do that? We took a closer look at the system, and as I mentioned, there's a huge amount of available energy. And in order to affect these step changes in combustion quality, you require 1/5000th of that energy in electrical form. And so we started experimenting with a set of technologies known as thermoelectrics that basically convert heat directly to electricity. And what we found was we're not just able to make enough energy to power a fan, but we created this excess which we're using to generate consumer value. And so what we have now, this is the current prototypes. We have 20 of these that have been out in the field in India. And this is sort of the aspirational target for what this will look like when we actually go to market. We've got a product that we can make for $25 that can save 50% of fuel, which has an economic value to the end user. It can reduce smoke by 95%. It basically eliminates black carbon production. And what no cook stove has done before is it offers functional benefits beyond cooking. So we can generate electricity to charge mobile phones and LED lights. This is normally a video of the prototype working, and what you would see would be no smoke and a cell phone charging. And so just sort of a snapshot at the individual level, a woman named Shashikala, who I spent some time with in Karnataka, she earns on the order of $2 a day, cooks exclusively on wood, but pays for that wood, so she pays about $4 a month for her fuel. She has no electricity, but she does own a cell phone, which she spends about $1 a month to charge. And she also spends between $3 and $4 on kerosene candles. She has a battery-powered, non-rechargeable lantern. She buys batteries for that occasionally. And so what we believe we can do is we can save her about half of her fuel expenditure and an aggregated $4 or so in electricity savings. And with that, if we were able to retail at $40, she could pay this back in 7 months, most likely with the assistance of microfinance to help finance the upfront costs. And this is not including carbon, which we think could, as that market develops, help reduce the cost to the end consumer as well. And then just a quick snapshot of our model. So we don't believe that we're going to be all that great at developing our own retail channels, and so our intention is to work with existing retailers in the field and leverage their access to communities, as well as relationships with microfinance. And then there's a segment of the market that will never be, or we don't believe will be addressable with a commercial model. And so, for example, in refugee situations, we intend to work with governments and NGOs to give away stoves. So that's all. Thanks.
Q&A followed by questions for everyone here. So just gonna set that up. Do you guys want to join me? So first of all, thank you both for those presentations. I'm sure that there's plenty of questions in the audience, but I just wanted to ask a few before we open it up. So David, first to you. You talked about the importance of kind of human capital and finding these people that you partnered with that had a lot of technical expertise. Are you finding that there are more and more people kind of interested in this field? Is it not as new of a concept when you're talking to people who have technical expertise to kind of do these types of ventures? Or what can you say about maybe the talent that you see kind of looking at kind of these social entrepreneurship and social ventures?
Well, I think that, I mean, for me, I'm very often looking for somebody very specific, like I'm looking for someone that can make, a little needle that's, 150 microns across. So it's a little bit like a treasure hunt. So, when I look for technology people, it's like that. With financing, it's different because I would say there's a lot of people in the finance world that are refugees seeking the going from the dark side to the light side. So there, I think that the talent pool is more abundant with technology and the way intellectual property and trade secret law is. It's harder to find the right expertise and work in a way where they're unencumbered to really help, to really give their best ideas. So finding the right people also involves a lot of legal work to make sure that they're not going to get sued. So that's another consideration in this work. Yeah, so I mean, and of course, there's a lot more classes now in universities and whole course. I think you can major in social entrepreneurship. I mean, the bottom line is that it's a minuscule field. There's a lot of interest, and we're all interested in it here. But when you look at it as an asset class, it's really not growing. I go to the World Economic Forum a lot, thanks to the Schwab Foundation, and I get to hobnob with all these big corporations. I think you need $1 billion in revenue in order to just go. And we're just a drop in the bucket, and nobody really gives a crap about us. And so that's what we're up against, and that's why I got interested in financing, because again, it's like, how do you craft social investing funds to help grow the field and create more examples of social enterprises where you can start having trading in those shares in order to grow the field, but keep it, don't let it get out of hand like it is today. With so many companies, so many manipulations of stock price, or, people, inside the banking system screwing it up for the rest of us. So I think that there's an appetite for this type of investing, and I would say that to grow the field, probably, the big money is governments and development banks and foundations. And so how do you take that money and position it in a way that leverages commercial finance? Because that's the big bonanza. That's, if you look at the flow of funds, it's not the philanthropic world, it's not the social investing world, it's all the other investments going on. So, I mean, just currency trading alone is like enormous. So how do you create this market for social enterprise so that there can be trading there?
So Jonathan, you're at a very different stage in your business, so I'd love to kind of hear a little bit more about the pilots that you've been doing and kind of how you've set those up to identify things to adjust, or what are some of your takeaways from the work that you've been doing?
Sure. So, we've done very limited pilot testing. We've had 20 of these devices, and they've, as I mentioned, we're initially focused in India. It's the largest single biomass cooking market in the world. And so we've run tests in 2 different locations, one in northern India as part of a black carbon climate study, which was really about sort of quantifying performance in the field, and then a more market-based study with a retailer in southern India looking for consumer perceptual issues. And so, we've learned a couple of things. We certainly learned where we had low-hanging problems with the product. That it very quickly shows you that a BOP consumer is just as demanding in terms of performance as any other consumer we've dealt with. But fundamentally, I mean, we've had good recognition of the benefits. The thing that we're trying to figure out is, are we a cell phone charger that cooks your food, or are we a stove that charges your cell phone? And so understanding how we create that message for the consumer and communicate that is a challenge that we have to face over the coming year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I never would have thought to put the two together, right? So it must be kind of a pretty revolutionary concept when you're taking it out to the field. So, and are people's initial reactions? I mean, the idea of putting their cell phone next to like a stove, is that?
You know, we were really nervous that people would say, oh, you know, water, phone, you know, this is my valuable thing, this could spill. That hasn't been the feedback. What's funny though is that's what people want to talk about. I mean, so, you know, women will tell us, oh wow, it's, you know, they can recognize that it uses less fuel, and they like that. They can recognize that the flame is more vigorous and stays lit more. You know, I don't know if you remember in the picture, but the woman sitting there with a steel tube blowing on the fire, and this is how you actually keep a fire going. So the fact that you can improve the process is great, but then you go out and you do demonstrations in public, and it's actually all the men gathered around the stove who, you know, line up to see if their cell phone will charge with it. And then so, I think it's really changed the conversation, you know, compared with what we know of our competitors going out and solely selling around these fuel savings benefits. And we hope also that it's, you know, if in many cases the man is the money holder in the family, that we can engage this purchasing power for, you know, what will also be a benefit to the women and children in the home.
I think at this point, it'd be great to open it up for some questions from the audience, and then if we need to, we can go back to some questions, Q&A at the bottom. So before we open it up, just if you could please come to the microphone, just so we can capture it for the video. So if you have a question, please. I know you had a question, sir. So.
I'd have a question for David, I believe. You started off in a medical device market, which arguably is a high margin business, and you know, I agree that those margins are probably beyond 95% or something like that. And pharmaceuticals is the same, and Enya has shown how you can reduce the margins. But what you're essentially doing, just from a business model perspective, if you're operating in there, is you basically take out all this profit that's being generated, and you just limit it to a arguably reasonable profit of some 20-30% or so on top of COGS. Now, what you also alluded to is you're thinking about financing models, and you're thinking about solar. Now, this may come to a shocker for a lot of the people, particularly down in Silicon Valley. At the end of the day, if you're doing solar, you're producing electricity, and electricity is a commodity, and that is not a high value added product such as medical devices, and that's the shocker for Silicon Valley. So you actually have to compete on producing a lot in order to actually make up on that. How do you think that's going to work in an environment where you do not have flexibility on the pricing side, such as here, where you can sell solar panels for a ridiculous amount of money, and everybody in Berkeley is just jumping to that. But where you have to actually sell it in Enya, where people get electricity for free, because that's what the politicians are promising them. So they take the wire and they connect it, and they have free electricity. So that's where I'm trying to get to. I know it's a little bit more complex, but I think you're getting within the electricity or photovoltaic and commodity business into this very difficult small margin type of a thing, and small margin type of a thing in a not having money community such as in India is a particular challenge.
I did what little work I have done to demystify the cost structure of solar. I mean, right now the cheapest price you can get is it's $1.80 a watt from mainly Chinese suppliers, and that's at a wholesale level. And my sense is that it really needs to be down to a retail price of about $1 a watt. Now, some of the thin films are at a wholesale price of $1 a watt. So, but nobody's really gotten down to a retail price of $1 a watt for either thin film or silicon. And I think that silicon is probably better than thin film because thin film loses its energy over time. So my sense is that that there's still some margin to cut out, and the part of the equation is technology. Like for instance, there's one company here, Kali Solar, that's doing silicon photovoltaics out of metallurgical grade silicon. It's a chemical purification process rather than having to make the cell out of silane gas. And so if you combine that with a more direct distribution and you combine it with end user financing, that gets the price down even more. Like for instance, if you look at Bangladesh, Grameen Shakti, they sell a 50-watt panel with some appliances, not even low voltage appliances, and your stove would be great for them. They're at like $3. It's a $10 a month for 3 years, and my sense is that if you can get the cost price of the technology down and better low voltage appliances down, and have a longer financing and get it down to like $2 or $3 a month, then it really opens up a whole market that Grameen Shakti presently can't reach in Bangladesh, and that's I think it's a huge market there that doesn't have electricity. So I think again looking at solar from a whole ecosystem's point of view, where you can change the equation by reducing costs, reducing margin, and putting in adding in financing that's longer duration. Instead of 3 years, 6 years. Instead of 6% interest, 4% interest. And there's ways to create some form of subsidization in that interest realm. There's all sorts of ways to get what the average poor person has to pay each month down. So you are correct. It's a completely different challenge than medical devices, but took it up anyway. Yeah.
Which is, and you could speak way better than I could for the value of energy, in developing countries and unelectrified areas. But, the value of these first few watts in the home is extraordinarily high. So, if you take a woman like Shashikala, she's going and paying 15 to 20 cents to charge her cell phone, and that's 3 watt hours of energy. She's paying what you pay for a kilowatt hour in your home here, and so the value of that electricity is a lot higher in these markets.
Maybe I can take the opportunity to introduce Mariette from Moses Hotel that is here she's a Haas alum from 2008, and she was working with D-Light Design in India until a few months ago, last month actually, as their head of business development and marketing. So if you want to stand, Mariette, we can also direct questions to her, and then we're going to, do you want to introduce yourself at all? Okay. Yeah, I guess I did introduce you. So at the end, you can also ask Mariette questions, or if other questions come up, we can direct them to her as well.
Is this on? Yep. My name's Mateo. Thank you so much for coming. Really interesting stories. I think that we're starting to see this trend of individuals having an opportunity to be involved in financing some of these solutions. I think you can say like Kiva is sort of at the forefront of connecting development to in the southern and eastern hemisphere to the west. And then you have other models like Tom's Shoes and others that try to connect these sort of social enterprises with the opportunity for individuals to participate. Do you see that type of model being something that is that could potentially accelerate solutions like BioLight, or a solar fund for all, where you can potentially buy solar bonds and invest in something like that? Or is that sort of like a more negligible input contribution?
Well, I think that what you're suggesting, I think there's enormous opportunity, and I'm actually helping Tom's with the new strategy, but I can't talk about it. And but I think that if you look at what Tom's does with cause-related marketing and how they help so many people, and you combine that with what is Facebook called now? Social media. I don't know. The whole Facebook phenomena. If you look at how you connect people in a very personal way with their consumer purchase to how it's leveraging something that's helping somebody halfway around the world, the technology is there to support that now. And I think that there's a huge amount that can be done that's not being done with social media to connect people more directly with those that they're helping. And that's part of the way that I'm interacting with Tom's right now on a new venture, which I'm probably saying too much. In fact, you should cut this part of the video.
We actually have an outdoor recreation product that leverages the same technology in a little portable camping stove. And for us, yeah, the idea is you can sell this at full, first world margin, so we can, clear $60 or $80 profit per device. But for us, it's not about, it's not a long-term part of our business model. So it's not about, for us, it's not a Tom Shoes model, right? It's not a buy one, give one. It's about helping us subsidize the startup costs of our business or moving into a new market. But fundamentally, it's not about subsidizing each device that goes into a home.
Hi, I have a question. And by the way, now that I'm out, it's really fun to come see your presentation, and I see 2 of my products on there. So I have a question on one of the words that I saw written on the slide that yet you didn't speak of. It's compassion. It's the foundation of the Arvind model. And I think it's a word we don't hear at all in business school. And I thought maybe if you could expand a little bit on, how you live that and the experience you have with Arvind and the compassion element. Thanks.
I think that it goes back to the comment I was making that Arvind is patient-centric. And Dr. Venkataswamy is sort of, he's the founder, well, he was the founder and the visionary leader that really made Arvind happen. He died a few years ago. I learned a lot from him about that, the work is really service to others. And that's the prevailing ethic in the Arvind culture. And I think that that's how Arvind is successful in spreading its model, because it helps organizations that already have good leadership and the desire to be helpful to others find the, help them with the nuts and bolts of how they do that, of how they create pricing systems to make their services affordable, how they attain a certain level of efficiency, how they maximize their purchasing or their human resources mix to bring down the cost and therefore increase the margin even though their prices are coming down. So I would say that it all boils down to service. And like my own personal philosophy is that I liken the world economic system to a very sick person in need of acupuncture. And the Chinese system of medicine is, you have these subtle meridians, and there's too much concentration of energy in one part that means that there's not enough energy in another, and they use needles and moxibustion and whatever to redirect the flows of energy. And I think that if you see that 50% of the wealth is owned by 1% of the people, and I think 1% of the wealth is owned by 50% of the people, I think that's an actual statistic, I forget where I read it, then our global economic system is in extreme need of acupuncture. And so how do we, and I think that having empathy and sort of understanding from a spiritual point of view how empathy arises in us, or sympathy to the plight of others, is what fuels a lot of really good development. I think some of the best development I've seen. And so, so yeah, I think that's a big part of it. And a lot of the corporate types I work, they have that in themselves, but they're so ruled by all the expectations placed on them to achieve certain financial goals on a quarterly basis, and their bonuses are tied to it, and it's really hard for corporate types to step out of that world where everyone's trying to maximize their personal return on investment. Departments and divisions are their own cost and revenue center. The company has to look good to its shareholders, to its the CEO has to look good to the board. And it's really hard to, sort of be client-centric in that environment, even though companies say they have corporate social responsibility. But if you look at how most corporate social responsibility is, it's just another way of doing corporate philanthropy, or being fair to the employee, or not screwing up the environment. Very few companies use their core competencies and assets to be socially transforming, because that's where all their margin is tied up in, and they can't, they're not open source, they're closed source. They can't let that out of the bag. So anyway, I'm just sort of rambling, but I don't know if I answered your question.
This is probably the most boring question you'll get tonight, but I was wondering if you guys could both speak to successful distribution strategies you've seen in bottom of the pyramid markets. Specifically, what are key partnerships that you need to have? Do you need to kind of engage the full community? And then maybe what are pitfalls to avoid?
Aravind has a very strong community outreach, and they get the community. Instead of reaching out to a customer, they reach out to a whole community. And in India, community groups like Lions or Rotary or spiritual organizations, or big landowners or corporations in any given area, are often, they want to do social good, and because it looks good partly, but also there's a tradition of helping people in South Asia like that. There's a certain social consciousness, and so Aravind focuses on marketing and distribution that's really about getting the community involved, and that's what I'm trying to help this other large medical device company do now with all of its pilot projects. And instead of thinking about individual marketing, how do you get a whole community involved through community organizations to bring forth those patients needing cardiology services, whether it's a pacemaker, a stent, or whatever? How do you combine new technology for detecting people in need of stents or pacemakers in a way that the community is quite involved and supportive? I would say that Auralab's success is really about Aravind Eye Hospital. Aravind trains people from all over the world. They train thousands a year. They use Auralab products, and then all those people being trained go back and start buying Auralab products. So they actually spend very little on marketing in the traditional way that medical products are marketed in India, where they have these detail guys. It's the same here in the U.S. who go out and go to a doctor, and they're all lined up outside the doctor's door to give their 10 or 15 minute spiel. So for the hearing device for Conversion Sound, we don't know if this will work, but what we have in mind is, right now the distribution, well, there's only 7 million hearing aids dispensed each year, and there's over 600 million who could benefit from a hearing device. And so we sort of demedicalize the fitting of devices to go around a very high margin model, because that's what it is now. The manufacturer, I think in the US even, there's only 23% market penetration for hearing aids, and that's mainly because audiologists and the hearing industry lobby Congress to ensure that hearing aids aren't reimbursed by Medicare, so that they can avoid price control, basically, or government having downward pressure on the price of hearing devices, even though it would probably increase their volume quite a bit to have it be Medicare reimbursed. So what we're looking to do is to design technology that, and we probably could have used your help as a design firm to design our technology, so that the consumer can test their own hearing and program the device if they have mild loss, for instance, in the U.S. market, or where a technician with 1 day's training can do it, whether they're in Grameenphone or they're in an organization serving people with disabilities in Nigeria, or they work in Telefonica in Mexico. These are all the different potential partners that we're looking at to, again, create non-conventional distribution. So like for the United States, we're looking to see how we position the product, not as a hearing aid where it requires state certification to test hearing and program the device, but as an assistive listening device that you can go and buy off the shelf and then just download an app to your smartphone to wirelessly test your hearing and program the device. So it's looking at how to go around dysfunctional channels that aren't reaching people.
Pilot stage. So, but I wanted to invite Mariette maybe to come up and just talk a little bit about distribution as well. Yeah, or you can.
That was the story of my life for the past year and a half. So I was just, since I knew this was going to happen, while David was talking, I was trying to think about how I was going to even structure what I was going to say, because I could talk about it, I think, for the next 2 hours. So first, I think, let's go back to where we were about a year and a half ago, and which was really kind of, okay, what are the possible channels out there? And that list is really long, but to me, basically, to make it kind of short and sweet, you can build your own distribution network. You can go through existing retailers and such. Even there's a whole slew of different types. You can have decide that you're going to actually have your products, depending on the type of product, built locally. Or assembled locally, and that really changes the whole dynamics. Creating localized micro entrepreneurs. You can do what we call whatever, it doesn't matter, but people that actually sell the products that aren't part of the team, that aren't part of a retailer, but just are individuals that live in these villages that sell products, and what we call RSPs. But and so anyway, so there's so many amazing different types. You can have through MFIs, you can go through NGOs. It really depends on what you want. And so to me, really what it came down to is that we had 3 different factors as we thought about distribution, because it's actually not just about distribution. It's about getting your products into the hands of the people. And there's a lot more to that than just distribution. And so what we discovered is that there's distribution, okay, that's literally the pipeline. And so that's what we kind of labeled as access. And so we needed people that could provide access to our end users. But then we also realized that, like Jonathan said, the rural consumer is a very sophisticated consumer. And though they may not buy products like ours, they definitely know what they want and what they need, and they're extremely careful about their product decisions and their purchasing decisions. And therefore, an element of trust is absolutely critical. And so how do you build trust to the rural consumer that doesn't have running water, that doesn't have electricity, that is surrounded by water and monsoon and you can't even have access to them? And so that's another really important element. And lastly, one that we've touched upon already is the element of financing, because most people don't have the financial means to actually put the money down. D-Lite has products that are between $10 and $30. And even $10 is a stretch for a lot of families. A tiny little small anecdote on that. Diwali last year, we launched our Kirin, which you saw the 2 kids holding, and we go around and we do a market launch, and we go visit a family, and they love it. They absolutely love it, and they absolutely want to buy one. And so, the father goes and pulls out money, and he has 150 rupees, and it's 500 rupees. And they go around scavenging more, and they found 250 rupees. And then he tells his family members, he goes and gets the other, because Indian families, there's a lot of them. It's like, okay, go find your money, go find your money. And they end up with 300 rupees. it is so difficult to not be like, here, let me just give you 200 rupees so you can get it. But so here's a family who didn't have the funds to actually go and buy one when they really wanted one. So that's why the financing bit is actually critical. So when we think distribution, don't only think the actual pipeline. Think all the pieces of that, the education, the trust, the relationship with the consumer, and also how they're going to be able to pay for it.
I think at this point it's about 10 minutes till the end of our session, so we wanted to wrap up and have individual Q&A. I think each of you may have questions that you want to talk to with David or Jonathan or Mariette, so they've agreed to stay till 8:30. So we'll go ahead and break the kind of formal session now with just a big applause and thank you for our panelists.